There are few figures in reality television as unforgettable as Tony Beets, the rough-talking, fiercely determined, and famously foul-mouthed gold miner from Discovery Channel's Gold Rush. From the moment he appeared on screen, clad in oil-stained workwear with a commanding presence, fans knew they were witnessing something different. Beets wasn't just a character made for television. He was gold mining, its grit, danger, unpredictability, and sheer brutality embodied in one man. For over a decade, Tony has fascinated viewers across the globe with his relentless pursuit of gold in the frozen wilderness of Yukon, Canada. But behind the booming voice, unapologetic attitude, and powerful dredging machines lies a deeply personal story rarely explored on camera. His life has been a tapestry of unimaginable hardships, from leaving his native Netherlands at a young age to facing devastating personal tragedies and ongoing health battles. And yet, through it all, he has endured, building an empire of dirt, iron, and ambition. In the world of reality television, so much is scripted, edited, or exaggerated, but Tony Beets is a raw, unfiltered force of nature. This video will peel back the layers of the myth and reveal the man. From his humble beginnings in Europe to his rise as a gold mining icon in North America, from raising a family on the ice-cold frontier to grieving the unbearable loss of a child, every chapter of his life is filled with both gold and darkness. Whether you've watched Gold Rush since its early seasons or you're just beginning to understand the gold mining phenomenon, this is the true story of Tony Beets. Not just the miner, not just the television star, but the survivor. Let us now dig deep into frozen ground and into Tony's life, to uncover what really happened to one of the Yukon's most legendary men. Before he became the so-called king of the Klondike, Tony Beets was just a farm boy from a small village in the Netherlands, a world away from the icy, rugged wilderness of the Yukon. His journey to international fame and mining dominance began in the low-lying farmlands of Wijdeens, a tiny town located in the Dutch province of North Holland. Tony was born on December 15, 1959, into a modest, hard-working family. His upbringing was defined by simplicity, labor, and discipline. The Beets family didn't have much in the way of luxury, but they had grit, responsibility, and a powerful work ethic. From a young age, Tony was put to work on the family farm, waking up before dawn to tend to animals, plow fields, and complete whatever tasks the day required. There were no complaints, no allowances for laziness. Work was life, and Tony accepted it early. It was this no-nonsense upbringing that laid the foundation for the man he would become. By his own admission, Tony wasn't the best student in school. Formal education wasn't a priority in his world, work was. And he had a natural instinct for machines, systems, and problem-solving that would later define his mining empire. More than anything, Tony was restless. He didn't want to grow old on the same farm where he had shoveled manure as a child. He wanted more. But that more wasn't going to be found in Wijdeens. As he grew into adulthood, Tony began to see that his life had to move beyond the narrow borders of his village. The Netherlands, though beautiful, was not the place where wild dreams were forged. He had ambition, but the local economy and land couldn't contain it. In the early 1980s, he made a bold and irreversible decision: he would leave. It wasn't an easy move. Tony left behind his parents, his childhood friends, and the land that had shaped him. But he was chasing something bigger: freedom, opportunity, and the chance to build something of his own. And there was one country that symbolized all of that: Canada. A boy leaves Europe, a man heads for the Yukon. Immigrating to Canada wasn't glamorous. Tony didn't step off a plane and onto a gold claim. Instead, he arrived in a vast, unfamiliar land with no money, no connections, and very few guarantees. The transition from a structured, disciplined Dutch village to the wild expanse of Canada was jarring. He didn't speak fluent English at the time. But what he lacked in language, he made up for in raw determination. In the early days, Tony worked wherever he could, in construction, on dairy farms, digging trenches, operating equipment. Anything that paid and kept him moving forward. These weren't easy jobs, and they certainly weren't high-paying. He toiled in long shifts through rain, snow, and cold. But what stood out was his toughness. Nothing fazed him. If something was broken, Tony fixed it. If a job was dirty or dangerous, he took it. In many ways, this was an extension of the farm life he had known back in the Netherlands. But now, it was survival. Over time, Tony began to hear stories about the Yukon, a legendary place where fortunes were waiting beneath the frozen earth. It was remote. It was brutal. It was exactly what Tony Beets was looking for. In the late 1980s, Tony moved north to the Yukon. For most people, this would have been a terrifying decision: to leave everything behind and head into the wilderness in search of gold. But for Tony, it was destiny. He didn't want comfort. He wanted challenge, and the Yukon offered that in abundance. Those early years in the north were anything but easy. He had to endure harsh winters, heavy snow, long isolation, and the incredible costs of living and working in such a remote location. There were days when his equipment wouldn't start, when the river would rise and flood their progress, or when he and his crew would work 20-hour shifts just to keep the dream alive. But he kept going. Tony didn't come from money. There were no investors or reality TV contracts back then. He earned every bit of progress through pain, sweat, and clever engineering. He was known in the local mining community as a man who could repair almost anything, build anything, and do so in temperatures that would send most people running. It's impossible to talk about Tony Beets without mentioning his wife, Minnie. The two met as teenagers back in the Netherlands, and they had been together since they were about 15 years old. Minnie was with him before the gold, before the fame, before the television cameras. When Tony decided to move to Canada, she came with him, no hesitation. Together, they built a family in the harshest conditions imaginable. Minnie would later handle many of the business operations behind the scenes while also raising their children in the Yukon. She is just as tough and just as sharp as Tony, and their marriage became a rare example of unity in a life filled with instability. Their partnership, both romantic and business, is one of the strongest pillars of Tony's story. As the 1990s arrived, Tony Beets had transformed himself from a farm boy into a full-time, self-taught gold miner in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. But this was just the beginning. He had the land. He had the machines. He had the drive. Now, all he needed was to strike gold, and that's exactly what would come next, along with fame, fortune, and heartbreak. When Tony Beets left the Netherlands in search of something greater, he had no map, no certainty, and no backup plan. What he had, though, was unmatched determination. After settling in Canada in the early 1980s, he faced the reality of starting over from scratch in a country far removed from the farmlands of his youth. But Tony wasn't afraid of work, he was built for it. Tony's first years in Canada were grueling. He began working in construction and agriculture, often under tough, low-paying conditions. He didn't mind labor, he welcomed it. Whether operating heavy machinery or doing physical jobs others avoided, Tony's willingness to outwork everyone around him quickly became his defining trait. But he wasn't content just making ends meet. Canada was full of wilderness, resources, and opportunities for those willing to chase them. That's when Tony began hearing tales of the Yukon Territory, a northern wilderness rich with mining history, buried gold, and extreme weather. For others, the Yukon might have sounded like the edge of the world. For Tony, it sounded like home. In the late 1980s, Tony packed up everything, tools, hope, and a new Canadian dream, and made the trek north. The trip to Yukon was not just geographical, it was emotional. He left behind the relative comfort he had just begun to build for a brutal and uncertain life in one of the harshest climates on Earth. But this was Tony Beets. Comfort had never been his goal. Dawson City, Yukon, was once the epicenter of the Klondike Gold Rush, drawing tens of thousands of miners in the late 1800s. By the time Tony arrived, the wild crowds were gone, but the gold still slept beneath layers of permafrost and river mud. And Tony was determined to wake it. In the beginning, he worked for other mining operations, learning everything he could. He watched how claims were managed, how equipment broke down, and how miners fought daily battles against frozen ground, mechanical failure, and isolation. It wasn't long before Tony decided he didn't want to just work for other miners. He wanted to own his own land. With savings and loans, Tony scraped together enough money to purchase his first mining claim. It wasn't prime land. It wasn't easy. But it was his. That land would eventually become part of what's now known as Tamarack Mine, the base of his gold mining empire. Tony began using older, salvaged equipment, bulldozers, excavators, water pumps, to start his first independent gold mining operation. Most of it was unreliable, some of it had to be rebuilt by hand, and nearly all of it failed at some point. But Tony had a gift. He could fix anything. He wasn't formally trained as a mechanic or engineer, but he understood machines like most people understand language. When something broke, and it always did, Tony climbed out of his loader, lit a cigarette, and fixed it himself. The first few years were hard beyond belief. Winter temperatures regularly plunged below -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Rivers froze solid, fuel lines cracked, engines failed to start, and food supplies ran thin. But Tony never quit. He didn't believe in luck, he believed in stubbornness. By the early 2000s, Tony's operations began to grow. He reinvested every dollar back into his equipment and land, gradually expanding Tamarack Mine. He became a local legend, not for charm, but for his unbreakable work ethic and towering presence. He was loud, tough, intimidating, but fair. If you worked hard, Tony respected you. If you didn't, you'd hear about it, fast. Still, the life took its toll. The long winters. The isolation. The endless battle against cold, cost, and catastrophe. This wasn't a lifestyle for most, but it was perfect for Tony. The world begins to notice. For years, Tony Beets mined gold without cameras, without fame, and without recognition.
He didn't care.
He just wanted the gold. But that would change dramatically in 2010, when the Discovery Channel launched a new show that would change his life forever, Gold Rush. At first, Tony wasn't a main cast member. He appeared in Season 2 as a mining veteran that newcomer Parker Schnabel turned to for advice. Parker, young and ambitious, sought wisdom from Tony, who offered it in the only way he knew how, brutally and honestly. Audiences were instantly hooked. Here was a man unlike anyone on TV. No filter, no fake smiles, no apologies. Just grit, fury, and intelligence.
And people loved him for it.
Discovery knew they had something special. Tony Beets quickly became a central figure on Gold Rush, and his private life turned public overnight. But what viewers didn't yet know was how much Tony had already endured. The tragedy he kept buried, the weight he carried silently, and the battles he was still fighting. This tough miner had scars far deeper than the Yukon ground he dug. Behind the machines, the mining claims, and the rough personality, there exists another side to Tony Beets, a man deeply committed to his family. Although his image on television is often one of gruff discipline and blunt communication, Tony's true foundation has always been his wife and children. They aren't just passengers on his gold mining journey, they are the engine behind his success. In the brutal, unforgiving wilderness of the Yukon, gold isn't just a commodity, it's an obsession. And for Tony Beets, it was the fuel that drove his every move. What began as a desperate venture into the frozen heart of Canada would eventually grow into a sprawling gold mining empire built on sweat, diesel, and sheer force of will. By the early 2000s, Tony had already spent more than a decade learning the art and agony of mining. He knew what it meant to fight the earth for every ounce of gold. He had battled frozen pipelines, broken down machinery, and hostile weather. But those hardships were just training for what came next: ownership, expansion, and risk at an entirely new scale. After years of working both for others and on his own small claims, Tony finally set his sights on building a large-scale operation. No longer satisfied with modest yields or leased equipment, he began investing in older but powerful machines. He bought bulldozers, excavators, and haul trucks, most of them used, some barely functioning. But to Tony, that was an opportunity. He could fix anything. He could make these machines work like new. His first major step toward building a mining empire was the full establishment of Tamarack Mine, his main claim near Dawson City. At the time, the land wasn't considered top tier. Other miners had overlooked it, believing it had been too heavily mined in the past. But Tony had a different vision. He believed that with the right approach and enough muscle, there was still gold to be pulled from that ground.
And he was right.
As he began working Tamarack more aggressively, his yields began to climb. His instincts were paying off. He ran long shifts, often up to 20 hours per day, with minimal crew, sometimes just family. The money started to flow, and Tony reinvested every dollar.
More machines, more fuel, more parts, more land.
But success didn't come easy. The operation was constantly on the edge of disaster. Fuel prices would spike. Parts would break during peak season. Harsh winters would arrive early and destroy months of progress. There were seasons where Tony lost money. There were nights when diesel fumes and fatigue clouded his judgment. But he never quit. Every setback became a lesson. Every loss became fuel. One of the key moments in Tony's rise came when he decided to do something almost no one else dared: purchase and revive an old gold dredge, a giant floating machine used decades earlier to extract gold from riverbeds. The dredge he bought was a 75-year-old behemoth that had been sitting idle in the Klondike since the 1950s. It was rusted, frozen, and partially buried in the earth. Most people thought it was scrap metal. But Tony saw it as a symbol of history, of power, and of his own brand of mining. He paid $1 million for the dredge and another fortune to move and refurbish it. Critics called him crazy. The operation to dismantle and relocate it took months and required precision few in the mining world had ever attempted. Each piece had to be hauled over rugged roads, reassembled at a new location, and repaired from top to bottom. But Tony wasn't concerned with cost. He was concerned with legacy. Once operational, the dredge became one of the most iconic elements of his mining empire, and a centerpiece on Gold Rush. It allowed Tony to process massive amounts of pay dirt with greater efficiency, and its return to action became a symbol of his philosophy: work hard, think big, and don't listen to doubters. As the years passed, Tony expanded his claims, added more equipment, and brought his children deeper into the operation. Monica started taking on supervisory roles.
Kevin managed equipment.
The family operation evolved into a multi-claim gold mining enterprise, pulling in millions of dollars in gold during strong seasons. But running an empire wasn't without cost. The logistics alone were staggering. Fuel had to be flown or trucked in over hundreds of kilometers. Machinery had to be repaired on site, often without access to spare parts. Crew members came and went. Permits had to be obtained from skeptical local governments. And all of this had to be managed while working around the clock, 7 days a week, during the short mining window each summer.
And still, Tony pressed forward.
He wasn't motivated by comfort. He wasn't even motivated by money, necessarily. He was driven by control, pride, and survival. Gold mining was more than business, it was a war, and he was the general. One of Tony's most unique qualities as a mining boss was his approach to risk. While other miners waited cautiously for perfect conditions or guaranteed returns, Tony often bet everything on bold, high-stakes decisions. He would sink his entire season's budget into one repair, one stretch of land, or one mechanical upgrade.
Sometimes it paid off. Sometimes it didn't.
But it always pushed the boundaries of what was possible. By the time Gold Rush made him a household name, Tony Beets had already become a legend in mining circles. His empire wasn't glamorous. It was loud, greasy, dangerous, and unrelenting. But it worked, because he worked. Tamarack Mine, the dredge, the expanding crew, and his children's involvement weren't just business developments. They were testaments to Tony's decades-long dream, to build something that couldn't be taken away, built not by investors or inheritance, but by his own two hands. In many ways, Tony's empire stands today as the perfect metaphor for who he is: tough, flawed, powerful, and entirely unpolished. It might leak oil, it might break down, but it keeps moving forward. And as Tony likes to say, you either get gold or you get the hell out of the way. By the time Gold Rush came calling, Tony Beets was already a well-established name in the Yukon. He didn't need television cameras to validate his success, he had the gold to prove it. But when Discovery Channel introduced the idea of documenting modern gold miners for a worldwide audience, Tony's raw personality and gritty operation were too compelling to ignore. Tony first appeared in Season 2 of Gold Rush, not as a primary cast member, but as a mentor to Parker Schnabel, a young and ambitious miner trying to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. Viewers immediately took notice of Tony's no-nonsense demeanor, his thick Dutch accent, and his candid opinions. Where others sugar-coated problems, Tony simply barked out the truth, often laced with profanity. He didn't care about cameras. He cared about results. Discovery Channel realized they had struck gold, not in the ground, but in personality. By Season 4, Tony had become a major fixture on the show. Viewers were fascinated by his larger-than-life presence, his mechanical genius, and the sheer scale of his operation. Unlike the other miners who were still learning the ropes or struggling with management, Tony came across as a seasoned warhorse, gruff, efficient, and ruthless when necessary. The Beets family became a fan favorite. Audiences enjoyed watching the dynamic between Tony and his children, especially Monica, who emerged as a smart, tough leader in her own right. Kevin, Mike, and Minnie all played supporting roles, adding authenticity and depth to the portrayal of their family-run business.
But Tony wasn't acting.
What viewers saw on screen was exactly who he was in real life: a miner with little patience for nonsense, high expectations, and a firm belief in hard work. That honesty, even when abrasive, made him a standout. Still, fame didn't change Tony. He didn't hire PR teams or media managers. He didn't try to soften his image. He embraced the spotlight on his terms, demanding that his crew operate the same way they always had: fast, focused, and fearlessly. Behind the scenes, Gold Rush brought new challenges. The presence of cameras sometimes complicated mining operations, and Discovery producers occasionally clashed with Tony over content and privacy. But Tony understood the trade-off. The show gave him a global platform to tell his story, and it helped fund parts of his expanding empire. Over the years, Tony's presence became central to the show's identity. Whether viewers loved him or hated him, they never ignored him. And for Tony, being remembered was more important than being liked. The series turned Tony Beets into a television icon. But to Tony, television was never the goal.
The gold still was.
Tony Beets' mining empire isn't just powered by machines and gold claims, it's powered by his iron will and fierce leadership. Known as much for his ruthless management style as for his mining prowess, Tony's approach to running crews is unfiltered and uncompromising. On Gold Rush, viewers quickly learned that Tony demands absolute discipline and results. Mistakes are met with swift criticism, often shouted across the worksite. There's no room for laziness or half-efforts. His blunt language and sharp temper have earned him a reputation as a tough boss who doesn't tolerate fools. While some see this as abrasive or even abusive, Those who work with him understand it's his way of pushing people to perform under extreme conditions. Mining in Yukon is dangerous, expensive, and unpredictable, so every mistake can cost thousands of dollars, or worse, someone's safety. Tony has fired crew members on camera and replaced them without hesitation. He expects loyalty but demands professionalism first. The high-pressure environment means that patience is limited, and communication is often direct, lacking pleasantries. This style has caused tension with some crew members and occasionally sparked conflict within the family, but it has also created a strong culture of accountability. Tony's leadership is not about charm or popularity. He openly says he doesn't care if people like him. What matters is getting the job done. Tony Beets' mining career has been marked not only by hard work but also by legal battles that threaten to derail his operations. Mining in the Yukon comes with strict environmental regulations, and Tony's aggressive style sometimes clashed with government agencies. One of the most notable incidents involved a diesel fuel fire in 2015 at his Tamarack mine. During mining activities, a large quantity of diesel caught fire, leading to a dangerous blaze that caused environmental concern. Regulators fined Tony's operation heavily, citing violations related to fuel storage and safety protocols. This event brought significant media attention and public scrutiny. Environmental groups criticized Tony for neglecting safety and risking the pristine Yukon landscape. Tony, however, argued that mining is inherently risky, and while accidents happen, he takes responsibility seriously. Besides the fire, Tony has faced other permit delays, fines, and inspections that complicated mining schedules and increased costs. Navigating government bureaucracy in remote Canada is notoriously difficult, especially for independent operators like Tony. Legal struggles have occasionally delayed mining seasons or forced Tony to halt operations to comply with regulations. These disruptions have been frustrating for a man who values control and speed. Despite these challenges, Tony has shown resilience, often pushing back against regulators or adapting quickly to new rules. The ongoing tension between mining ambitions and environmental concerns remains a constant battle. One of the most profound, yet seldom discussed chapters of Tony Beets' life is the loss of his infant daughter Jasmine. In 1992, when Jasmine was just 2.5 months old, she passed away. The tragedy left an indelible scar on Tony and Minnie, shaping their outlook on life forever. The cause of Jasmine's death has remained private, with Tony rarely speaking openly about it. However, the grief is visible in the rare emotional moments Tony has shared. Unlike his typical tough persona, his voice softens when mentioning her name. For Tony, mining became both a refuge and a distraction, a way to channel his sorrow into relentless work. The tragedy deepened the family's bond, particularly between Tony and Minnie, who leaned on each other to survive the pain. Fans and viewers saw a brief glimpse of the softer side on Gold Rush when Tony mentioned Jasmine during a heartfelt moment. It reminded audiences that beneath the rough exterior was a man who had known great loss. The experience influenced how Tony raised his other children, emphasizing resilience and the preciousness of life. It also made him fiercely protective of his family and operations. The loss of Jasmine is a cornerstone in understanding Tony Beets, not just as a miner or TV personality, but as a man shaped by tragedy and driven by the need to keep moving forward. Mining in the Yukon is brutal on the body, and Tony Beets, now in his 60s, is no exception to the toll it has taken. Years of exposure to extreme cold, heavy machinery, and physical labor have left their mark. While Tony rarely publicly complains about his health, viewers and insiders have noted signs of fatigue and wear. Mining is demanding, even dangerous, and the long hours combined with stress put pressure on both mind and body. In interviews, Tony has occasionally acknowledged the physical challenges of his work, but he insists he's not ready to slow down. Retirement is not in his vocabulary. The isolation of mining life and the relentless pace add to the strain. Cold weather aggravates old injuries, sleep is often sacrificed for work, and medical resources in remote Yukon are limited. Rumors about specific health issues have circulated, but Tony maintains privacy around this subject. What is clear is that his age makes mining more difficult than ever, yet his stubborn spirit keeps him pushing. The physical toll also affects his relationship with family and crew, as he tries to balance workload with personal well-being. The Beets children are integral to Tony's mining operation, but their relationships with their father are complex. Monica, Kevin, Mike, and Bianca have all grown up with mining as a central part of life, but each has their own path. Monica, fiercely independent and capable, has become a leading figure on Gold Rush. She carries her father's intensity but adds her own style and leadership. Their relationship is built on mutual respect, though Monica has occasionally clashed with Tony's bluntness. Kevin is more reserved but equally essential, managing much of the machinery and daily operations. His calmer approach balances Tony's fire, but there have been tensions over expectations and decisions. Mike keeps a lower profile, focusing on equipment and supporting roles. Bianca remains private, with less public involvement. While Tony demands excellence, he also wants to see his children succeed and carry on the legacy. Training the next generation is a source of pride, and sometimes frustration, as generational differences emerge. Mining is unpredictable, and Tony Beets' operation has endured numerous setbacks. Equipment failures, bulldozers breaking down, pumps failing, dredge malfunctions, have cost time and money. Fuel price spikes add financial strain, while environmental permit delays hinder progress. Tony's large-scale operations require flawless coordination, and any disruption can cascade. Tony's aggressive expansion occasionally outpaces logistics, causing breakdowns at critical moments. Crew turnover and weather also compound challenges. Despite setbacks, Tony's approach is to fix problems quickly and push forward, refusing to let obstacles define him. Tony's on-screen persona has sparked controversy. Some viewers criticize his language, temper, and harsh management, painting him as a villain. Rumors of quitting the show or being fired have circulated but were never true. Reality TV editing can amplify conflicts, but Tony's bluntness is genuine. He has responded by saying he doesn't care about popularity. His focus remains on mining and family. Mining accidents are common. Tony has survived close calls with equipment failures, fires, and extreme weather. His experience and preparation save lives. Tony Beets is a complex figure, a tough miner shaped by tragedy, hardship, and unyielding will. His story is one of survival, family, and relentless pursuit of gold. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories behind the world's most compelling personalities. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.